Hi there and welcome back. A few months ago I released a video detailing how I went about putting together a template for recording orchestral music, along with some hints and tips on what works for me. I say what works for me because I know not all people use templates or even like using templates. Take a look at this video if you haven't seen it already and you'll know what I'm talking about. The template itself contains most of my main libraries, the Spitfire Audio's BBC Symphony Orchestra and Albion 1, the two main libraries I tend to start off with when writing some orchestral piece. Now, I had a message from a subscriber recently asking if I could go a little further into the buses and effects used in that template for each orchestral section. So, stand by, that's what I'm going to look at today, routing and effects. Once again, a huge great thank you to all subscribers. Please do subscribe if you haven't done so already to be alerted when other videos are being uploaded. And please do continue to keep your questions coming, either here on YouTube or feel free to email me directly at musicdirectoronline@gmail.com. Right then, my orchestral template. Let's talk about routing first of all. This template is very simple, but it's simple for a reason. Unlike other forms of music, orchestral music shouldn't need a great deal of mixing, let alone a great deal of effects. The instruments of the orchestra collectively have a massive dynamic range, from the pounding timpani and percussion section to a distant sounding flute or clarinet. As such then, the orchestration you use will in effect be its own mix. What I'm trying to say is you don't write for a loud flute. You wouldn't use a bassoon if you wanted some heavy thunderous chord changes. But there are times when you listen to your work and maybe you think that oboe solo could be a little bit more prominent, or that bed of strings is a little bit too loud or obtrusive. In that scenario, you could do a couple of things. You could add some automation to adjust the levels, and that could be either the instrument itself or, especially if you have a lot of instruments playing at any one time, group that section of instruments and automate the group. Let's take a look at how this template is grouped. Now, before I go any further, I better mention that not all DAWs use the term group channel. Sometimes they're called buses or bus channels or auxiliary channels. They all, however, tend to mean the same thing. It's basically a track or a group of tracks that are coupled together and then sent to one fader on your mixing console. So in this instance, I group each orchestral section into its own group, as I like to call it. First of all, I'd like to mention these various folders here for the various sections of the orchestra are color coded. Now, the fact that all the woodwinds are colored blue is irrelevant, to be honest. The color, that is, it could be yellow with pink spots. The fact that if I then go into this folder, I will see three other folders, which are the names of particular libraries in this template. So we've got Albion for Albion 1, BBC Symphony Orchestra, and then I've got Swing. I think Swing is from Project Sam, is it? And then if I go into each of these folders, then we have the various instruments of the orchestra, and we drill down even further, and we've got the various articulations of each one. Now, the fact that they are all blue then, or in this instance, the strings here I tend to colour green for no other reason, but I do. The strings then exactly the same. We've got four folders there. Albion 1, Aperture, which I think is a Spitfire Audio library, some solos, and the BBC Symphony Orchestra again. Then when I go to the mixing console, I will see that whichever instruments I've got open at any one time will appear here, and they are blue. And the brass are that orange colour. The strings are green. You might think that's a waste of time. However, I find colour coding all the instrument sections Very useful, and particularly when this screen fills up and you've perhaps got 30, 40, 50 or more tracks, being able to go to the strings and know that you're looking for a green track straight away is I find, particularly useful. So that's the reason that I tend to use colours. Now, let's just close a few of these folders up, and you'll notice that at the bottom then I have another folder called Group, coded blue in this instance. And if I open that folder, we can see that we've got some group channels. And basically this means that if I was to add an instrument, so if I went to the woodwinds, for instance, and let's go to, I don't know, let's go to the Albion one, and there I want to add a particular track. It's always an instrument track. Look at some other of my videos to find out why I always use instrument tracks. And is it a contact instrument? What kind of instrument is it? But the audio output then, if I press on there, it will give you a list of all the groups that I have listed down here already. So if I wanted to, I don't know, add another flute in this instance, then I'd make sure that it was grouped to the woodwind group. I'll not add that at the moment. Okay, so when then we now move to the mixing console, and again, this is just how I like to have it set up. On the left-hand side of the screen, that's moving there at the moment, scrolling left and right, I've got my tracks that I've used in any particular piece. And so I can straight away go to these green ones because I know that these green ones are strings. And I also know that these strings are then grouped to these blue channels because, remember back here, these happened to be blue. So now if I was to play let's find a string patch here. Let's just go for that one. There we go. Because those string patches is coupled to this group channel, I see an output there, and then that group channel will send it to the main stereo out. It really is that simple. Of course, in lots of other music, you can have multiple channels. I try to keep it as simple as I possibly can. The only exception to the various groups being related to a section of the orchestra that I have is that I have two string patches. So we've got strings short, and also if I then move over back to, let's have a look at some string longs. These string longs then would then go to a different group channel that you can see there. Okay, so assume this is a very busy orchestral piece, lots of things playing. Rather than then if I need to bring down that string articulation or that string articulation, I would just go to whichever group I need to reduce. And I can have, and I think this is the same for all those, you can have as many instruments or tracks connected to any group. It's kind of infinite. I think it is. Someone will correct me if that's not the case. I was also asked in the same email from the subscriber I mentioned if I could expand on what effects I use on each section of the orchestra in my template. Now, this is where I would add a word of warning and caution. Again, unlike commercial modern music, orchestral music does not need a huge amount of effects added, unless of course your intent is to make your orchestral work sound less orchestral or less real. The only main effect you would need to add is reverb. Now, before I go any further, I need to say I am no expert in reverb, but what I do like to do in these videos is to make things kind of simple and explain things in a way that, yeah, even I can understand, he says. Many libraries have some form of reverb already added to the samples themselves. This can be further adjusted by the various mic positions that are available in most libraries. But However you adjust these settings, what you are looking to achieve is that all your instruments, or in all your libraries that you are using in any particular piece, actually sound like they are in the same room. In other words, they sound together, they blend as one, so to speak. So I want to try and explain how I achieve that in this particular template. But before that, a quick lesson on what reverb actually is and the different types. I promise, I'll keep this simple. Reverb or reverberation is created when a sound is created and the sound waves are sent out in all directions. The sound waves then bounce off all kinds of objects such as walls, backwards and forwards until finally the sound dies away. The length of time that sound takes to die away can be adjusted in our DAWs and thus gives a sense of our orchestra is either in a small space like your own living room or in a massive space like a cathedral. Reverb is sometimes said to glue the sound together, but the purpose here is to ensure that all instruments are in the same space, however large or small that space is. In my template, I use two types of reverb: algorithmic and convoluted reverb. What on earth does that mean? Well, algorithmic reverb simulates the reverb effect by a series of mathematical calculations and can imitate spaces, whereas convoluted reverb uses digital recordings of actual spaces and processes your instrument's sound through that space. Incidentally, convolution reverb uses a great deal more computer power, so if you're short of that, use with great care. So enough of this technical stuff now. We could get very technical, and if you need to know more, there are hundreds of articles and videos on YouTube that will try to explain this and maybe confuse you even more. Here, like I say, I want to keep things simple. And in an attempt to keep things simple, I want to try and explain something, a concept that I really struggled with because I couldn't find any YouTube video or manual that explained clearly the difference between an insert effect and a send effect. Those are two terms that you will most likely have heard quite a bit. I like to think of it this way. First of all, an insert effect is an effect you insert into a particular track or an instrument. It won't affect any other tracks or any other instruments. You insert it into that and all the computer power that it needs is just dedicated to that one track. However, if you then use a send effect, that effect sits separately from the track in an area where you can then send various tracks or instruments to the one effect. I mentioned earlier about algorithmic and convoluted effects. Certainly convoluted effects you need to use as a send vast majority of the time because of the computer power that it uses. So that, I hope, explains the difference between an insert effect and a send effect. When it comes to reverb, however, they tend to be send effects, not least because of the amount of CPU power that it's going to use. It's just much easier to manage all those tracks. Now, if we turn to this particular template that I'm showing you here, you will see that because in this section here, I also have some tracks which are effects tracks. You can see down there coloured dark brown. I've called it Reverb 1 and Reverb 2 for the two types of reverb that I mentioned earlier that I use. Now, if I then open up, I think I've lost, oh, there it is. If I then go back to the mixer, I have here I think somewhere, bear with me. I've set up a high sounding woodwind patch here. And you can listen very carefully with that, certainly if you're wearing headphones at the moment. With it being a short note, when it when the note stops sounding, you can hear an effect. Listen. It takes a second or so to completely die away. And that's without any effects already being added. And like I said earlier, many libraries have some kind of reverb built into their samples. That's the way they were recorded and the room in which they were recorded at the time. That is fine. Some libraries, however, are completely dry and have no effect whatsoever. But if you want to add, this is where we start using the two types of reverbs that I mentioned earlier. And because, as I showed you, we have two effects tracks here, when it then comes to on the mixing console, you'll see they will have appeared here, called Reverb 1 and Reverb 2. And on these particular tracks, we have two insert effects. One is an effect for the room, which we talked about earlier. The other effect is to make sure that the space that all these instruments are sounding in is the same. That's why I have the two, and those are on insert effects on those group channels. What I might want to do, I might want to, in some circumstances, for some instruments, send the output of that track to those two channels. And I've got a short sounding woodwind sound here, and I've also loaded a send. Here it says send reverb 1 and 2, and I can turn those two on, and once those are turned on, now that effect will be heard even more. Much longer to die away. Listen again, because part of that sample I am sending to these two channels. That's why they are showing a signal as well. So, well, we're talking about routing earlier. So the signal from here goes to the woodwind group channel, but part of that signal, which part depends on how high these particular settings are, and I know it's all going to be different for different for different doors. Part of that signal then goes to these two reverb effects, which then goes to the main stereo out. Now, you could use some effects on the main output channel. And I sometimes use a limiter if there's any chance that there might be some really loud peaks in any particular recording I've put together. I want to ensure, of course, that because of those peaks, nothing distorts, hence a limiter. And you will see here in the stereo out, I think there is my particular limiter. I wouldn't, or very rarely would I use any kind of compression on orchestral music. You really don't need it. There's many YouTube videos on compression, but virtually it always pertains to more modern music, not orchestral music. Try and keep all such things simple then. This is a simple template and works for me. If you find yourself spending more time correcting issues by using effects and plugins, there's something wrong with your orchestration that needs fixing. Concentrate your time there and don't get bogged down in numerous artificial fixes. You'd never find that in an orchestral concert hall. See you next time.